Halloween stories.
I first noticed the shadow 3 months ago, while walking home from my late shift. It flickered at the edge of my vision, a quick dart of movement against the brick wall of the alley shortcut I always took. When I turned to look directly at it, nothing was there. Just the amber glow of streetlights against rough brick. Exhaustion, I told myself. Working back-to-back shifts at the factory was catching up to me. But the next night, I saw it again. This time at the bus stop, a human-shaped darkness that seemed to stretch impossibly tall before collapsing in on itself when I whipped my head around. "Did you see that?" I asked the elderly woman beside me. She glanced up from her crossword puzzle, brow furrowed. "See what, dear?" "The shadow. Right there." I pointed to the empty sidewalk where I'd just seen it writhing. She squinted through thick glasses, then patted my arm sympathetically. "Working too hard, young man. My Harold was the same way before he retired." I nodded and forced a smile, but the skin along my spine had gone cold and tight. That night in my apartment, I heard it for the first time. A subtle scratching inside the walls. Too rhythmic for mice, too deliberate, like fingernails tracing patterns just behind the drywall. I pressed my ear against the cool surface, holding my breath to listen. Scratch, scratch. I jerked away when I realized the scratching had moved to precisely where my ear had been pressed. My phone rang immediately, making me yelp. Unknown number. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin even to my own ears. Nothing but soft, measured breathing on the other end. Then a click. I checked all the windows, tested the lock on my door twice. Nothing out of the ordinary, though the bathroom mirror seemed to hold my reflection a moment too long when I turned away. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by what sounded like whispers just below the threshold of understanding. I woke repeatedly to the sensation of weight at the foot of my bed, but saw nothing when I flipped on the light. In the morning, my eyes were bloodshot, tiny burst vessels creating crimson webs across the whites. As I leaned in close to the bathroom mirror, a shadow passed behind my reflection. I spun around. Nothing there. "Get it together, Mark," I muttered, pressing the heels of my hands against my eyes until bursts of color exploded behind my lids. At work, I dropped a crate of ports when I saw a shadow figure standing between two shelving units. My supervisor sent me home early. "You're a liability like this," he said, not unkindly. "Get some sleep." But home felt wrong now. The air seemed thicker somehow, resistant as I moved through it. And the shadows, they were everywhere, pooling in corners where no architectural feature could justify their darkness, stretching across my ceiling at impossible angles to the fading daylight outside. That evening, I sat rigid in my armchair, lights blazing in every room. The scratching in the walls had become a constant companion, moving in slow circuits around my living room. The refrigerator hummed, then made a sharp clicking sound I'd never heard before. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow detach itself from the wall and slide along the floor toward me. The shadows began following me everywhere after that night. To the grocery store, where one trailed me through the aisles, always just visible in my peripheral vision. To the doctor's office, where I tried to explain about the shadows, the scratching, the feeling of being watched. He prescribed anxiety medication and suggested grief counseling, reminding me gently that it had only been 6 months since Sarah's accident. "Sometimes trauma manifests in unusual ways," he said, writing out the prescription with quick, efficient strokes. I didn't tell him I'd seen a shadow standing behind him, mimicking his every move. The pills helped for exactly 4 days. I slept dreamlessly, and and the shadows retreated to normal places, beneath the coffee table, behind the curtains, when the sun hit them. The scratching faded to the usual settling noises of an old apartment building. On the 5th day, I woke to find my medication bottle empty, though I was certain I'd taken only 4 pills. And the shadows were back, more substantial than before. They had texture now, not quite solid, but no longer the flat absences of light they'd once been. One shadow in particular seemed to follow me consistently, roughly human-shaped, but with elongated limbs that occasionally twisted at anatomically impossible angles. At work, I caught glimpses of it sliding between machinery, its movements smooth and purposeful. During my lunch break, sitting alone at the far table, I saw it creeping toward me along the wall. "What do you want?" I whispered. The shadow paused, then stretched upward until it nearly touched the ceiling. It had no features I could discern, yet somehow I knew it was looking directly at me. My chest constricted as if gripped by a giant hand. Jason from assembly walked in then, and the shadow instantly collapsed into a normal pattern, cast by the overhead lights. "Talking to yourself, Mark?" Jason asked, mild concern in his eyes. "Just thinking out loud," I replied, my heart still racing. Project planning. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a motel on the edge of town, reasoning that whatever was in my apartment couldn't follow me here. I was wrong. As I stepped out of the shower, the bathroom filled with steam that curled into almost familiar shapes before dissipating. And there, in the condensation on the mirror, finger-drawn letters appeared one by one. "We see you." I fled the motel room with wet hair, wearing yesterday's clothes, my unpacked bag clutched to my chest. In my car, I sat trembling, watching the motel window where I swore I could see multiple shadows moving behind the thin curtain. The radio turned on by itself, scanning rapidly through stations before settling on static. Through the white noise, I heard a whisper, "Always watching." I drove aimlessly until dawn, the shadows in my rearview mirror growing and shrinking as I passed beneath streetlights. When the sun finally rose, I found myself parked outside my own apartment building, with no memory of having decided to return. Inside, things had changed. The scratching was now constant, no longer confined to the walls, but seeming to come from the furniture itself. And the shadows, they were everywhere, clustering in every corner, stretching across the ceiling, pooling around my feet wherever I stood. I called in sick to work, then disconnected my phone when it immediately rang back with an unknown number. I covered all the mirrors in my apartment with bedsheets, unable to bear how my reflection would sometimes move a fraction of a second after I did. That night, I heard something new, soft footsteps tickling my bed. As I lay rigid beneath the covers, eyes squeezed shut. The weight on the mattress shifted as something sat beside me. Cold fingers brushed my cheek. I ran. Out of the apartment, down the stairs rather than trusting the elevator, out into the street in nothing but my sweatpants. The night air raised goosebumps on my bare chest, but I didn't stop running until my lungs burned. When I finally looked up, I was standing before Sarah's grave. The moonlight cast my shadow long across her headstone, except it wasn't mimicking my posture. It was reaching toward the grave, fingers elongated into claws. "They're not real," Dr. Emerson said firmly during our emergency session the next morning. "Shadow people are a common hallucination associated with sleep paralysis, extreme stress, and certain types of psychosis." "But I feel them watching me," I insisted, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "They follow me everywhere. They touch me some days." He increased my medication and scheduled me for twice-weekly sessions. "We need to address the underlying trauma, Mark. Sarah's death. This has nothing to do with Sarah, I snapped, though my voice broke on her name. That night, heavily sedated, I slept. And in sleep, I found clarity. In my dream, I stood in our old apartment, mine and Sarah's, exactly as it had been, before the accident. She sat at the kitchen table, her back to me. "Sarah," I whispered. She turned, but her face was nothing but shadow, a swirling darkness that stretched outward as she stood. "You see us now," she said, her voice distorted as if coming through water. "You weren't supposed to see." "What are you?" I asked, backing away. "We've always been here, watching. You weren't meant to notice us." The shadow that had been Sarah tilted its featureless head. "But grief thinned the veil for you, and now you see too much." I woke with a revelation burning in my mind. The shadows weren't haunting me. They had always been there, watching everyone, unseen until my grief for Sarah had somehow opened my perception. Over the following days, I tested my theory. The shadows reacted when I acknowledged them directly. They grew more agitated when I stared too long. They clustered most thickly in places where terrible things had happened. The intersection where Sarah died. The alley behind my apartment, where a homeless man had been murdered last year. I began researching obsessively, finding scattered accounts throughout history of shadow people, or watchers, seen by those in extreme states of grief or trauma. Most witnesses eventually committed suicide, or were institutionalized. A select few found ways to blind themselves to the shadows again, through medication, alcohol, or religious conversion. But none of that would work for me. I knew too much now. The shadows knew I could see them, and they were growing bolder. Last night, I woke to find my bed surrounded by them. Dozens of featureless silhouettes standing in a perfect circle, leaning incrementally closer each time I blinked. The scratching had become voices, still unintelligible, but clearly trying to communicate something urgent. My reflection had developed a habit of smiling when I wasn't. I understood what I had to do. If my eyes had become cursed with this sight, there was only one solution. I sit now at my kitchen table, surgical gloves on my hands, the sterilized tools laid out before me. The shadows gather close, more of them than I've ever seen. They're not quite bodies vibrating with what I can only interpret as excitement or agitation. "You won't be seen anymore," I tell them, picking up the sharpest tool. "Not by me. The pain is extraordinary, but brief. The screaming I hear might be my own, or it might be the shadows suddenly deprived of their unwilling witness. When it's done, I sit in perfect, blessed darkness. For the first time in months, I feel no eyes upon me. The scratching has stopped. The weight of constant observation has lifted. In this new permanent night, I am finally, blissfully alone. Or so I believe, until cool fingers interlace with mine, guiding my bleeding hand to touch what feels like a face with no features except for the slick, empty sockets where eyes should be. "Now you truly see us," Sarah's voice whispers against my ear. "And now, you're one of us too."